welcome to this panel discussion, the first panel in the Nordic tent today. My name is Charlotte Flynn Petersen. I'm the director of the Danish Foreign Policy Society, and I feel extremely privileged to moderate this panel today, which is on the importance of history, culture, and language to understand the key role for Belarus of the future, for the future of Europe. So this is a very important discussion. I think a much underestimated discussion that we have in Europe, and therefore I feel very privileged. We have a fantastic panel. From my left side, we have Niels Musiks, who is Special Rapporteur to, from the UN on Belarus, and a lot of other things. We have director of Belsat, the Belarusian independent media channel, and we have Pavel Tereskovic, who is the on the Commission for Education of the Coordination Council of Belarus, and also, I guess, a former professor at the Belarusian University. And then we have Lisa Dubcha-Huchka, I think it's correctly said, who is director of Beladania and also has been the co-founder of the Belarus Research Network for the European Neighborhood. So one of the things that I think we really should understand when we speak about Belarusian cultural and identity is that there's a lot of misconceptions, and some of the misconceptions we'll try to investigate today, and then we'll also try to investigate what are the possibilities for preserving Belarusian culture, language, and identity, and what are the sort of what is being done at the moment to do that, and how is the conditions inside of Belarus for language, culture, and identity. So one of the first speakers in this panel, and to whom I'm really happy to ask on these questions, could you, Pavel Tereskovic, ask us a bit about what are some of the misconceptions and why do they exist on language, culture, and identity of the Belarusian people?
Okay. Hello, everybody. It's a great honor for me to make a speech in your festival. And I would like to start with some peculiarity of Belarusian culture and Belarusian identity, and then come back to your question about superstitions and Soviet heritage. Belarus is a typical part of a cultural borderland, East European borderland. What does it mean? It means that in the borderland there is no single dominant culture. This is a permanent process of the changing of dominant culture. And each person who lives in borderland should decide how to adopt to dominant culture. This is a rule of the life on the borderland, and this is the rules how to survive. And once again, Belarus is a typical part. So we have, for example, 2 Christmases officially, Catholic and Orthodox. We have 2 Easters, also Catholic and Orthodox. We have 2 Kupalas Day, analogy of the Ligo. It's different 2 weeks in between them. We have 2 official languages, and we have 2 Independence days, which are quite opposite to one another. In the middle of the 19th century, famous Belarusian historian and anthropologist Adam Kirkor asked some peasants in the suburbs of Minsk about his confessional belongings. And the peasant said that formerly he was of the Polish church, and now probably of the Russian one. And this probably, in Belarusian, zdaється. This probably describe a lot about the Belarusian culture and about the living on the borderland. Belarus was Christianized by the end of the 10th century, and Christianity came from Byzantium through Kiev. But at the same time, we have a story about Scandinavian priest Torvald, who Christianized Polotsk slightly before. In the 14th century, when Belarus became a part of the Magnus Duchy of Lithuania, the main part of our nobility became Catholic. In the 16th century, they became Protestant, and by the end of the century, they turned to Catholicism. And in the 17th century, for lower classes was invented typical border religion, Union Church. By the end of the 18th century, 80% of Belarusians were Unionists. But when Belarus became a part of the Russian Empire, Russian authority prohibited Union Church, and by 1839 converted the major part of Belarusians into Orthodox. They heavily pressed on Catholic Church. And in the Soviet period, Soviet authority pressed both Catholics and Orthodox, almost eliminate these churches completely in Belarus. And now Lukashenko attempted to make Belarus a completely Orthodox country. At the same time, less than half of population really religious, and we know quite well that the number of Protestant community much bigger than of Catholics and Orthodox taken together. What does it mean to live on borderland? Timothy Snyder labeled our country as a part of bloodland. This is not only because of the Hitler and Stalin terror. Belarus suffered from the Soviet-Polish War, from the World War I war, from the Napoleon invasion, from the so-called Nordic War, from the war in the middle of the 17th century when approximately half of population were killed. And Belarus, as a part of Magnus Duchy Lithuania, was attacked both by Russians and Sweden. There is a historical proverb in Belarus. Стуль москали, а стуль шведы, нема де деться з великой беды. From the one side Russians, from the other Swedes, there is no escape from the great trouble. This is why those peasants said to Adam Kirkor that he is probably of the Polish church. It doesn't mean he was not confident in his beliefs. He didn't confident about this strange person, and he tried to guess what is better to say to him. Belarusian national movement started in the beginning of the 19th century. There were at least 3 waves of this movement blocked by the Tsarist authority. In the 1840, Russian Emperor Nicholas I prohibited even the name of Belarus, and the new name was invented, northern part of the Russian Empire. And it was considered there is no any Belarusians at all. This people is just part of Russian people, polluted by the Polish influence. And the purpose of this Tsarist politics was to eliminate all difference from Russians, to make this territory once again the territory of the Great Russia. Belarusian national movement started exactly in the beginning of the 20th century it was weak because Belarus was one of the most backward parts of the Russian Empire from the point of view of economy. And 96% of Belarusians were peasant, 87% were illiterate. Nevertheless, in 1918, Belarusian national movement proclaimed the idea of the establishment of Belarusian national state, and it was made on the 25th of March of 1918, which is unofficial Independence Day of Belarusian movement even now. In the beginning of the 20s, Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic was constructed. Of course, it was not separate independent state. It was autonomy in the Soviet Union. But in the 20s, we had our own government, our own parliament, Academy of Science, National Theatre, National Library, National Archive, etc., and etc. It looks like almost like a true national state. But in the second half of the 1930s, there was a period of crucial Stalinist repression. The major parts of Belarusian intellectuals were simply killed. We celebrated each year 29th of October, the day of the shooted Poles. In this day, 132 Belarusian writers were killed by NKVD. Belarus was heavily suffered from the World War II, and after this it was kind of the intellectual desert. And even in the end of the 1950s, Belarus was still backward region of the Soviet Union, predominantly agrarian, and the most part of Belarusians were peasants in the collective farms, which looks like new edition of serfdom. And then was kind of economical miracle, because first time in our history, Belarusian came to power, Mazurov and Masherov. They got a tremendous investment from the Moscow, and in the 3 decades, Belarus became one of the most advanced republics of the Soviet Union. A huge wave of former peasants moved to the city from the exactly collective farm serfdom to new life with a 8 hours working day, with a guaranteed salary, with life in new blocks of apartments with refrigerators, TV sets, etc., etc. And they considered that this is a miracle. But they should pay for this miracle. And the payment was Belarusian language. Because in the cities was predominantly Russian-speaking, and in the cities is what considered that Belarusian language is a collective farm language. And if you want to be a modern progressive person, you should speak only Russian. And in the middle of the 1980s, there is no any one Belarusian school in the cities. This is a Soviet heritage. But this is not only Soviet heritage, because in the same time, in the late Soviet Unions, Vasil Bykov started to tell truth about the war for us. Svetlana Alexievich, our Nobel Prize laureate, started to tell truth about our life in Soviet Union. Vladimir Korotkevich, our famous writer, started to tell the truth about our true history. And Zenon Pozniak, archaeologist, started to tell truth about the scale of the Stalinist repressions in Belarus. In this late Soviet Union, we started to protect it, to protect our cultural heritage, we started to restore our medieval castles and churches. We investigated, detailed our folklore, and opened that is one of the most preserved folklore in Europe. And in this period, in late Soviet Union, the new wave of the national movement appeared. It was like miracle also. And without this movement, it was impossible to proclaim independence of Belarus in 1991. Today, we have much harder time than in Soviet Union. Today, several hundreds of thousands of Belarusians should immigrate. Today, we have more than 1,500 political prisoners. Today, all publishing houses independent in Belarus are closed. More than 300 of organizations of civil societies closed. And I give you only one example. What does it mean today even to speak in Belarusian language? Dmitry Dashkevich, activist of the national movement, was arrested 3 years ago. He was arrested by Gubazik. Gubazik is kind of mix between NKVD and Gestapo. He was cruelly beaten in this police, and policemen cried to him, "Why do you speak Belarusian language? You should speak normal Russian language." And he was beaten in front of the eyes of his wife, which was also arrested, wife pregnant with her 5th child. This is the reality of present-day Belarus. But please believe me, we will survive. We used to protect our language, our culture, and our identity through the ages. So we will survive, we will win, and живе Belarus!
Живе. Thank you, Pavel, for giving us this background for the further discussion. I think it was a very powerful background and a very powerful overview of the development of Belarusian culture and history and the different elements of it. So I'd like to turn to you, Alina, to hear a bit about the role of the media at the moment, both internally in Belarus, as well as how independent media is actually struggling or fighting for preserving the Belarusian culture and identity.
Thank you, Charlotta. Thank you, Pavel, for this very short but powerful history of Belarus, which is excellent background for what I want to say. Today I want to tell you how it is to be journalist of Belsat nowadays in Belarus. I'm Alina Koushik, and I'm editor-in-chief of Belsat TV. Can you imagine? This is the only Belarusian language satellite TV channel. For 17 years, we are broadcasting via satellite, but for all this time, we've been illegal in Belarus. We are based in Warsaw. Our newsroom is in Warsaw, but most of this time, our journalists, they used to work in Belarus. Not now, of course. But we never been legal there because Belarusian authorities never gave us an accreditation and never allowed us to work officially. Why? Because they don't like truth. This is simple. Being a journalist nowadays in Belarus, it's not just a profession. It's a form of resistance. And I want to tell you a couple of points I prepared for today's discussion, how is to be and how do we feel like being journalists nowadays. You are a journalist and you are a smuggler of truth. Because we not just report facts, we are smuggling this truth to the country, the truth is criminalized. Every story takes its risk if you are a journalist, because you can be you detained, other people who are in the country, they also can be detained. You don't just cover a story, you are a story in your own. 11 of Belarusian Belsat journalists are political prisoners at the moment. They've been sentenced up to 8 years behind the bars just for being journalists. From 2 years to 8 years. And we remember days of these my colleagues every day. Katya Andreeva, Irina Slavnikova, Vladimir Matskevich, and other colleagues, Larisa Shirakova, who are sentenced and are keeping in very bad conditions and Lukashenko's prisons. This is our pain, and we call on all the authorities to release political prisoners. And each person who is going out of the Belarusian jail, it's a small victory for us, but we believe that all political prisoners should be released because they done nothing but their job. Yes, if you are a Belsat journalist, you lost everything, but you keep going. We lost our colleagues, our families, our gravestones. We could not present on the funerals of our closest relatives in Belarus. Even our apartments, houses or dachas were confiscated by regime. But you are still keep going, doing journalist. We journalists are officially extremists. Belsat is called by regime as an extremist formation, so I'm a head of extremist formation. What does it mean? It's not a metaphor. That means that Belarusian regime describes our entire content, team, our audience as extremist. That means that it's banned in Belarus. You can watch Belsat, but you cannot comment, you cannot like, you cannot share our content. That is, if you do this, you can receive up to 7 years behind the bars just for sharing content. This is how authorities try to minimize our influence. But anyway, we still have 10 channels on YouTube with over 1 million subscribers there. Now Belarus is less than 9 million people, so it's more than 10% of population who are just subscribing other channels, but we know that most of the people, they're watching us without subscription. And moreover, Belsat is available on satellite, and this is the safest way to watch Belsat nowadays. We are not fighting against regime only, but we also fighting against algorithms. You know, this magic world, but in this big tech nowadays, this is very important word for all journalists. Because Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, they don't prioritize Belarusian language. They are pessimizing our content in Belarusian language. It is much easier to do all these things in Russian language, but we do in Belarusian. Because as Pavel said, language is a part of our identity. And I really believe that if you want to keep our independence, first thing we need to preserve our language and our history. We work in exile, yes. Now we don't have journalists at all in Belarus. All our journalists, more than 200 people, were evacuated in 2020 to Poland. But we still have our hearts in Belarus. So we are fighters. Authorities, they really want to erase a lot of stories, and we are covering these stories. I'm finishing, I know. So, I've got a question for you, dear audience. Please raise your hands who wants to become a Belsat journalist. Work in such circumstances. Thank you so much. We have the only one person. Because Belsat offers nowadays no security, no glamour, no way home, and real risk of prison. Who is doing this? Some really brave persons, some stubborn and some believers. People who are being journalists by their blood and their background, and not only journalists, but Belarusian journalists. So I'm admiring everyday work of each person who is creating Belsat nowadays, and I believe that independent journalism for Belarus nowadays, it's like a bridge between those two realities. Sad reality of authoritarian regime in Belarus and normality and also some democratic values. That's why we are showing two types of things and content. We are covering what is going in the country, but also we are telling the truth about the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alina. I was actually just going to ask you an additional question, which is actually what kind of content are you contemplating? What is it like, apart from the journalistic content, is there other types of content that you see is necessary when you have this audience in Belarus and outside of Belarus?
Belsat is a normal television, like you all guys have in your TVs or YouTubes. We use all the possible platforms to get to our audience. What type of content we produce? All type of content we produce. Of course, one of the most important news, talks, discussions about politics, about social life, about economy in our country, yes. But the other and one of the most important part of our mission, our identity, is content about Belarusian history, about Belarusian language, about our identity. And this is what we try to develop. But nowadays, what we started like a couple of months ago, to create more so-called neutral content. This is very beautiful word. Neutral means that it's not very politicized for Belarusians. So it is normal morning show, it is normal travel show, just to show Belarusians normal life. That normal life is not a politics. But believe me, in Belarus, everything is politics. So even neutral content, if it's on Belsat, everything is politicized.
Thank you. So now I turn to Lisa Dubinka-Husha, who is the co-founder and advisor to the Belarus Research Network, and also work with the Tikhanovskaya team on cultural, as an advisor on cultural diplomacy. So could you tell us a bit about the network of the Belarus Research Network, which is actually funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers? Why is this important? Why is it important to do research at the moment? And what is sort of the target audience of this?
Let me see if it works. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for having me here today. Why is it important to have the network? Well, I think the question is both very simple. We are neighbors. It's geography. But the question is also rather complex, because the very fact that we ask this question presupposes that there might be an alternative to not having a network, research network on Belarus. For me, this question should not exist, because how can we, as neighboring countries, not be interested in each other's culture, politics, trying to explain what is going on? And in fact, it has been like this. It has been like this for many, many years, and we used to live with this illusion that something is happening in Belarus. We have simple answers. There is a regime, and every election is business as usual. But in 2020, things have changed. Personally, my research background, my research focus before 2020 had been on small states, foreign policy of small states, Nordic, Danish foreign policy. I was not really doing research on Belarus. I became a Belarusian researcher after 2020, when living in Denmark, being of Belarusian origin, being a lecturer in international relations and political science, suddenly I was asked to give some answers to those questions that arose in 2020. My Danish colleagues, where they were asked by journalists to give a comment, were pointing on me and saying, yeah, ask Elisaveta, because she might know what is going on, because it was clear it was not business as usual. And I remember the very first coverage in the news about the elections in the morning, August 10th. It was presented like, yeah, now Lukashenko has won elections again, and maybe, you know, we will turn this page very soon. We'll just cover that there was elections and a bit of protest. But we knew that it was not just a bit of protest. It was not the protest that we had seen before. And things have changed dramatically. It was necessary to explain where all this energy came from, what the Belarusians shown the world, what they were trying to show in those peaceful protests. There was a lot of previously unspoken narrative. They wanted to say, hey, we exist. We exist, we are who we are. And that was a discovery for the world. So therefore, there were questions, there was a demand, and we created the network based on this demand, based on the questions asked by the general public, by the research community. And it appeared that we don't have that much of research done on Belarus specifically. I wouldn't say that there should be specific, I don't know, focus. I mean, researchers, they generally focus on some very specific things, and Belarus can be, you know, a subject of research, but not only as a subject of research. It's also about the exchange between researchers, between the research community. And here, this research network gives a platform for Belarusian researchers to be heard, to provide their expertise, to speak out to the world, and to get also feedback from their Nordic and Baltic colleagues. So it is actually a process of co-creation. And I hope that the network will continue and will grow into something bigger in the future. Since 2021, it has been run officially. And we have partners in Denmark, and I'm privileged that both Charlotte and me are here today because we were the co-founders and one of the partners in this network. We are privileged that the Latvian Institute for International Affairs is a brilliant partner here in the Baltic states, and we have had wonderful cooperation together. And each year we involve more partners from Nordic and Baltic states. I could continue, and I also have a few things to add, maybe to previous speakers, but maybe you have some questions.
Thank you, Lisa. I think one of the things is that we actually found there is a hole in terms of having collected research on Belarus. There are, of course, places in different places, but to have one place where you have concurrently new information about Belarus in English, which can reach an audience outside of Belarus is really, I think, important. And I guess this has also been some of the ideas behind of the network. Yeah, but I think I'd like to go to Niels, and then we'll have the discussions afterwards. So, Niels Musics, could you say a bit about, the role of the UN Special Rapporteur in terms of Belarus, and especially in terms of culture and identity and language?
Yes, thank you. First of all, it's great to be on a stage with such excellent speakers, and I guess I'm the only one from Latvia on this. But actually, I discovered recently at the university where I teach, there's actually a course on Belarus taught by Beata, who is a member of the research network. And I was very pleased to find that, just because Belarus is not on everybody's mind all the time, and that a young generation of people are learning about Belarus, I think, is fantastic. Now, my job is a mission impossible. It has existed, this post has existed since 2012. And it is to monitor something that doesn't exist in Belarus, which is human rights. It's to assist a government that doesn't want any help. And it's to have a dialogue with a civil society that has been destroyed. So I'm supposed to do this from outside of Belarus, because the government does not recognize a mandate, it does not cooperate, does not let me in. So I work a lot with the diaspora community. I work with we try to gather as much information as we can and make useful noise at the UN and elsewhere. Now, in the human rights world, cultural rights are in a bit of an orphan position. They are not the first rights that people think about. Usually it's civil and political rights, and then economic and social rights, and cultural rights are usually way down on the bottom of the list. There is a UN Special Rapporteur on cultural rights, and I and my predecessors have touched on cultural rights in our reports, but it's usually not the first thing that we talk about. We talk about the overall context of repression, which to me is quite striking in Belarus. I've done human rights monitoring in 47 countries, and I've never encountered a country that spends so much time, resources, and energy on screwing people. It has a long memory, and it has a huge geographical reach. There are still people who are being punished now for things they did 5 years ago. And people who are abroad, like our colleagues here, are also under risk of being persecuted. Did some work on trials in absentia of people. So they are tried even though they're abroad. Their property is confiscated, and they are faced with many difficulties and obstacles. In terms of cultural rights, I mean, I'm presenting a report next week, actually, at the UN, and in that report, I talk about the overall context of repression, and I do talk a little bit about cultural rights. I'll just mention one sentence. I talk about the repression and unjustified limitations on freedom of expression in the cultural sphere, including the arbitrary detentions and prosecution of actors, the designation as extremist of artistic output and media output, of course, and the cancellation of concerts and music festivals. We also criticize the compulsory re-registration of religious organizations. So it's something I touch upon in the broader context, but for my next report a year from now, I'm supposed to present 2 reports a year, one to the Human Rights Council in Geneva and one to the General Assembly in New York. And I'm already working on the General Assembly report. But for next year in the Human Rights Council, actually I want to focus in on language, history, religion. What is it that is distinctive about Belarusian identity? What makes it unique and distinctive? And so this will be the focus of a report from a year. So I will not just be covering it in passing, but I hope to go into depth and to work with all of you in the exile community to make sure I get it right, and that I can draw attention to discrimination on the basis of language, to the repression of culture and language, to the many political prisoners who are in prison for their cultural output. So this is something that I will be working on more and more. It's something that we've covered until now, but as I said, it's been in a bit of an orphan position.
Thank you so much, Niels. I think that's a very good point of departure, and I guess also a very good point of departure for you, Alina, in terms of to covering the work of Niels in Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly. But I think I'd like to return to you, Pavel, because as I see it, there is a direct line between, you could say, the war in Ukraine and the attack of the Russians on the, you could say, the Ukraine culture, and the saying that, you know, Russia is Ukraine, and the same, as well as you could say, the attacks on the Russians, or the Lukashenko actually, on the Belarusian culture and identity. So do you see any lines, or am I over exaggerating this sort of a genocidal element to it?
Yes, it's really true, and the direct aggression of Russia, full-scale aggression to Ukraine, led to the enlargement of the activity of so-called Russian soft power institutions in Belarus now. For example, Россотрудничество, it's official Russian organization to work with Russian culture, Russian language, etc., usually has no more than 2 branches in the foreign countries. In Belarus now, 5 representatives in the capital and in the major cities. And there is no problem with the Russian language in Belarus completely, but they work with our youth, and Россотрудничество increased the number of scholarships for Belarusian youth to study in Russian university in the last 4 years in 18 times. Last year, they provided 1,300 scholarships for Belarusian youth. And frankly speaking, it's much more than, if I could say, collective West could provide to Belarusian youth. There is also the activity of the foundation under the name Русский мир, and also the activity of foundation named by Gorchakov for public diplomacy, which provided scholarships for young Belarusian scholars. And it's very significant that this foundation has 2 foreign branches, one in Minsk, another in Tbilisi. So we see this activity. It's very, very dangerous because, for example, the branches of Россотрудничество played enormous role in the occupation of Crimea, Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast in 2014. And I would like to remember that one of the ideologists of the so-called denazification of Ukraine, Timofey Sergeytsev, who published the article in 2022, What Russia Should Do with Ukraine, proclaimed that the branches of the Россотрудничество should be the part of the occupational power in Ukraine. And we see this activity of Россотрудничество in Belarus, which looks like they're preparing for occupation of our country.
Thank you, Paul. And Alina, would you like to comment this? I think, you know, the eradication of Belarusian culture and language and identity, the targeted strategy for that, is that simply Lukashenko's doing, or is there more to it?
This is a part of broader policy in Belarus, but also in occupied territories of Ukraine. And I just want to add to what Pavel said, that for the first time this year, more young Belarusians went to study to Russia than to study to Western universities. And I think this is a very bad signal for all of us, for future elites of Belarus. If our best, most bright mind are going to study to Russia. It's not easy now to get to Western universities. It's not just an issue of scholarships, which number is not that great, but still you need to have TOEFL test or any other test on your language knowledge, which is almost impossible now in Belarus. You need to go out of Belarus to get this test, but to get out of Belarus, you need to have visa. And then to have visa, you need to say why you need this visa. So this is like a real quest to get to Western universities. But anyway, Pavel in Coordination Council in the Commission of Education and Science is helping. Transitional United Cabinet of Tikhanovska is trying to do what we can. But anyway, these situations seem to be more and more tough for all of us.
And Lisa, do you know, when you've seen from your point of view, how do you see the, what the government in exile is doing to support, you could say, the Russification of Belarus at the moment?
Resist
Yeah, resist.
Russification.
Yeah, resist. Resist the Russification of.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is a whole lot of things to be done, and the resources are really limited. And I must say that people who have been living and working in exile, a lot of them get also burned out because of uncertainty, because they live far away and they don't know if they have means to live off in the next few months. So they're working. A lot of them are working as volunteers. Some of them are combining this with some menial jobs, like we have, for example, cultural workers, people of culture from the Philharmonic who work in a restaurant and cook food abroad. And this is the reality. There is nothing bad in the fact of being employed at the restaurant, but we can clearly see that those resources that we have could be used better, wiser, because there is a huge potential, there is a huge intellectual capital to draw on here. And I know that the United Transitional Cabinet, Svetlana Tikhanovska's office, are trying to mobilize those resources and trying to talk to Western partners. And you see Svetlana Tikhanovska's schedule when she travels is, I don't know if she barely has time for herself. She works tirelessly to promote, to establish contacts and relations with foreign partners and promote the programs for researchers, students, for all other spheres of society, representatives of other spheres of society in Belarus.
Thank you. There is possibilities for questions if anybody wants. Then a microphone will go around. So you're very welcome to raise your hand and ask questions. But yeah, there's a question here. So now a microphone will come your way. Yeah. Of the future journalist.
Yes, I have background. That's why I'm not afraid to work in Belsat, because 2020 we are helping for Belarusian refugees come to Latvia, and that's why I think I am on the list on the Lukashenko regime for detonation if I somehow will be in Belarusian territory. That's why I'm not afraid about this. But I have a question for you. Two questions. First questions: how you see did right now are not making two societies? Society, Belarusian society, who is outside from Belarus, who are mostly starting to speak in Belarusian language, and then Belarusians who are staying still in Belarus. But maybe there are some starting to building to another societies? This is one question, and another question. I forget a little bit. I will.
Okay, maybe I'll ask Pavel to answer this question. You know, the thing that you now are creating two sort of societies: a Belarusian outside of Belarus, and then one internally which mainly speaks Russian, and that influenced by that.
And generally, I agree that there is two societies now. One absolutely free. I feel myself absolutely free in exile, but nevertheless it's exile. And in exile, more and more Belarusians tried to attempt to speak Belarusian language to make themselves different. And I'm confident that today Belarusian language for all Belarusians in exile in any country. Belarusian language is a language of freedom, is a language of democracy, and the language of resistance. And nowadays we speak with the regime in completely two different languages. But I know quite well that more Belarusian inside country also try to speak Belarusian to preserve their identity, preserve culture. And we have now a real boom of historical channels in YouTube and Telegram, etc., led by professional and not professional historians. They are extraordinarily popular, both inside and outside of Belarus.
Thank you. And then Niels?
Yeah, just a brief comment, because exile is not a fun place to be. I grew up in the Latvian exile community in Los Angeles, and I moved to Latvia 32 years ago. And when I meet with the Belarusian diaspora, I hear echoes of my youth. And what I tell Belarusians, I say, listen, you don't know how long this is going to last, so you have to be ready. You have to be ready when change comes. You have to be ready to jump in and help with your networks in the West, to help with your knowledge about how democracy and a market economy work, with your resources, because although you might not be rich compared to people in Belarus, once the economy is faced with market conditions, you will be considered to be rich. And you have to maintain the language and culture. This is what the Latvian exile community grew up with, this sense of mission. And then I say, and how can you have an impact? I said, I know, we had a huge impact during the independence struggle. Radio Free Europe broadcast in the information about where and when demonstrations would happen. We brought technology. It was the incipient diplomatic corps. And then I say, in the first post-independence parliament in Latvia that was elected in 1993, out of 100 members of parliament, 16 were exiled Latvians. So you can have a huge impact. And yes, when you go back to Belarus, people say, oh, you talk a little bit different. You act a little bit different. I remember when we came to Latvia first, people said, wow, that's very interesting. I haven't heard that phrase used in 40 years because our language had frozen, whereas it continued to evolve in Latvia. But that rift, that divide has been overcome now. So there will be differences, but they are easily overcome if there's goodwill on both sides. And you can play a huge role if you're ready, if you're well connected, and if you keep abreast of what's going on within Belarus. It's tough, and I sure hope that you don't have to wait 50 years like we did.
Thank you. And Elena?
Thank you, Niels, for sharing your personal experience. What I want to answer you, that this is one of the main narratives of propaganda, that we Belarusians are divided, that there are one Belarusians in Belarus, and here we are other Belarusians. This is bullshit. Sorry for using this word, not very diplomatic, but I believe that we are one nation. Yes, divided by the border, but we share the same values, we have the same history, and Belarusian, by historical background, we believe belong more to Europe than to Russian Empire. If you will count all the years and centuries we spent in European, let's say European or pro-European Commonwealth or Great Duchy of Lithuania, it is more than the time we spent together with the Russian Empire. That is why, yes, we Belarusians, first of all, we belong to Europe, and what we are doing here in exile influences what situation in the country. 85% of our audience of Belsat are in Belarus. That's why, being here in exile, we are working also on changes to the in the country. Thank you.
So I think I'll have a final question. I know that Stefan has one and I have one, and we only have 5 minutes. But still, I think this is a very important question because, from my side, and that is, what will a strong identity, Belarusian identity, mean for Europe? What is it actually? What does that mean for the geopolitical configuration of Europe? When you have a strong Belarusian identity, a Belarusian country which has a strong sense of national purpose, what will that mean for Europe? And what should Europe do? Pavel.
Belarusian identity, first of all, this is what makes us different with our friends and with our enemies. And once I totally agree with Alina, our past in Europe, we are Europeans, and I'm sure that we'll be Europeans in the future.
Thank you. And Stefan can just manage one question.
Yeah, I'm Stefan Eriksson from the Nordic Council Minister's Office. I wanted to ask if the position of Belarusian language is strengthening despite all the difficulties, but Pavel also already answered that. Is this happening? And that is also my sense. But I have a question. When I was living in Belarus, I was surprised to learn that many of the people that I met that spoke Belarusian, people that I really respected, it turned out that they had originally grown up speaking Russian, and they reached a point when they decided to change. And I don't know if any of the Belarusians in the panel would like to share. Have you also had these moments? Have you been Belarusian speakers from birth, so to say, or have you decided to change mainly to Belarusian at some point? It would be interesting.
Okay, I will be quick. Yes, this is my case. My family is Russian-speaking. My father was an officer in Soviet Army, so we used to live in Kyrgyzstan. We used to live in Eastern German. So whenever, then we go back to Belarus, and I first started learn Belarusian language in fifth class of primary school. So it was something exotic, but okay, yes, I've learned this. And then I used to have a couple of Belarusian speaking friends, so I was like bilingual, let's say. And then I have my son. I decided that I want him to have his real mother tongue, Belarusian language. That's why it was my last drop to become totally Belarusian, and also Belsat. I was a journalist at Belsat, and for me, this absolutely changed my point of view on what we are doing. So these 2 points, Belsat and giving born of my son.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be. Also, Lisa had a final comment. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to add just one comment about the Belarusian European identity. We have so many myths about us, and also including this identity of borderland, in a way something imposed to us so that we accept it and we live, and it's like we are told, okay, you are handicapped, you have to live with that, and we accept it. But in fact, In fact, we are normal, healthy, functioning people that can get rid of this complex of identity as seen from someone else. And just to give an example, in the 16th century, a Russian priest was visiting the Belarusian lands, and he made a comment. He observed what the Belarusian society looked like, and he said, they have Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants living side by side. They marry each other. They have children, sometimes without being married, and they sit in the city councils together. Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, also Jews.
Jews.
That was his image, and his conclusion was, and his appeal to the government, Russian government, was, we have to do something about it. It's critical. And they don't, they drink beer, and they don't, they go to church, but they're not so religious as, Does this remind you of us today, somehow, Europe today? And I think that's what we were. So we are not reinventing anything.
Yeah.
We just
thank you,
go back.
Lisa. I have to close now because we have a live stream. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Pavel. Thank you, Alina. And thank you, Niels. And thank you to the Nordic Council of Ministers for hosting this important discussion.
Thank you to all friends of Free Belarus. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you for being with us in this difficult time. We believe we will win.
Yeah.
Живи Belarus!
Живи Belarus!